47 Dominion warships eclipsed the frozen horizon of Jupiter. Below them sat Ganymede Station.
This destruction ends now.
40,000 civilians.
Stand down.
Engineers.
Miners.
I'm repping your command!
There were no
Stay
planetary
close.
defense
We're
cannons.
almost through this.
There was no
What if they
rescue
find
fleet
us?
holding in orbit.
They won't, I promise.
Just a fragile dome of glass and
Spike
steel
confirmed. It's
against
climbing
the endless
fast.
black.
I see it. Origin?
The Dominion
unknown.
commanders
Reroute
did not
power
ask for
stabilize.
a
Rerouting
parley.
now.
They did not
Status
issue a
report.
warning.
What's the threat level?
They simply aligned
Increase
their
patrols
plasma
in Sector
batteries
7.
and
Deploy
fired.
interceptors now.
In less than 10 minutes, the ice of Ganymede boiled into vapor. The emergency channels flooded with the sounds of tearing metal and the final frantic cries of the dying. Then there was only static. The Dominion thought this display of absolute power would break the spirit of humanity. They thought Earth, having played the role of a peaceful, divided world for so long, would finally drop to its knees and beg for mercy. They were wrong. 340 million miles away, the broadcast of Ganymede's destruction played out in real time. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, buried under 3 miles of solid granite, the Cheyenne Mountain Complex sat in absolute silence. The main strategic command center was a cavern of glowing screens and concrete walls. 100 technicians and officers stared at the primary display. No one spoke. No one breathed. They just watched the telemetry data from Ganymede flatline. 40,000 souls wiped out before morning coffee. Standing at the center of the room was Admiral Silas Vance. He was 55 years old, his hair turned to the color of cold steel, his face weathered by decades of keeping watch in the dark. He wore the dark blue uniform of the United States Space Command. For 10 years, humanity had played by the rules of the Galactic Dominion. They had paid the tariffs. They had endured the insults. They had kept their heads down, pretending to be a primitive, harmless species, all in the name of peace. Vance looked down at the left breast of his uniform. Pinned above his ribbons was the silver olive branch, the symbol of the Diplomatic Liaison Corps. He reached up his fingers, steady, and unclasped the pin. He let it drop to the metal floor. The sharp clink of silver against steel echoed in the dead quiet of the room. The main screen flickered. The static cleared, replaced by the towering, armored figure of a Dominion fleet master. His skin was the color of bruised iron, his eyes black and devoid of anything resembling empathy. When he spoke, the translation software pumped his voice through the bunker's speakers in a cold, synthesized drone. Citizens of Earth, the terrarium of Ganymede has been cleansed. You have sought to exist in a galaxy that belongs to your betters. You have claimed neutrality. Neutrality is a myth for the weak. You have exactly 72 hours to power down your planetary grids and offer your unconditional surrender. If you resist, your homeworld will share the fate of your colony. There will be no further warnings. The screen snapped back to black. 72 hours. A ticking clock placed on the survival of the human race. In the back of the room, a junior civilian analyst broke the silence. His voice trembled. Admiral, we don't have the fleet capacity to repel 47 dreadnoughts. If they bring their core armada, they'll turn the atmosphere to ash. We have to open a diplomatic channel. We have to negotiate. Vance did not turn around immediately. He kept his eyes locked on the dark screen. His posture was rigid, his shoulders squared. When he finally turned, his gaze stripped the panic right out of the young man's chest. Son, Vance said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried across the massive room. You don't negotiate with a rabid dog. You put it down. Vance walked toward the primary command console. The officers stepped aside, parting like water. He reached the console and placed his hand on the biometric scanner. A heavy mechanical thud resonated through the floorboards as a concealed panel slid open, revealing a manual interface keyboard and 2 keyholes. Commander Hayes, Vance said, not looking up. His second-in-command, a battle-hardened man with a scar cutting through his eyebrows, stepped forward. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He pulled a heavy steel key from a chain around his neck. Vance did the same. Sir, Hayes said, his voice tight but completely steady. If we do this, there is no going back to the table. We drop the veil completely. The veil burned with Ganymede Commander. Insert your key. They inserted the keys into the console. On my mark, Vance said. 3, 2, 1, turn. They turned the keys in unison. Vance typed a 16-digit alphanumeric code into the rusted keyboard. The screen prompted for a final confirmation command. Vance's fingers hovered over the keys for a fraction of a second. He thought of the 40,000 voices that had just been silenced in the dark. He thought of the peace they had tried so hard to build. Then he typed a single word, obsidian. He hit the enter key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a deep seismic hum began to vibrate through the bedrock of Cheyenne Mountain. It was a sound felt in the teeth, in the marrow of the bone, before it ever reached the ears. Across the globe, the veil was pulled away. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 300 miles off the coast of California, the water began to boil. Massive whirlpools formed, churning the dark ocean into white foam. The sky above darkened as warning sirens wailed from hidden buoys. Then the ocean tore open. A colossal structure of matte black metal breached the surface. It was a ship, but it did not look like the elegant, gilded cruisers of the Dominion. It was a brutalist wedge of armor, angled to deflect plasma built around a central spinal railgun, massive enough to shatter a moon. The water poured off its hull in absolute waterfalls. Its anti-gravity thrusters ignited, glowing with a furious blood-red light. It was the USS Nemesis, a dreadnought of the Obsidian Fleet. It did not rise alone. From the depths of the Mariana Trench, from hidden subterranean dry docks beneath the ice of Antarctica, from the dark side of the moon, and from the hollowed-out cores of asteroids in the belt, they awoke. Hundreds of them, cruisers, destroyers, stealth frigates, all painted in the light-absorbing black of the void. They had no polished chrome. They flew no bright banners. They were designed for one singular terrible purpose: survival through absolute destruction. Humanity had not spent the last decade cowering. They had spent it building. They had funneled trillions of dollars, uncounted man-hours, and the brightest minds of a generation into creating a war machine so terrifying that it had to be kept a secret from their own people. They had prayed they would never have to use it. The Dominion had forced their hand. Back in the command center, the tactical map of the solar system lit up. Blue icons, hundreds of them, bloomed across the inner system, converging into a massive spearhead formation. Fleet is airborne, Admiral. Hayes reported, his eyes tracking the rapidly updating telemetry. All automated shipyards have transferred command to the Nemesis. Reactor cores are running at 110%. Weapons hot. Status of the Dominion fleet, Vance asked. They have established a blockade around Mars. 50 cruisers, 3 dreadnoughts. They are holding position, likely waiting for their main armada to arrive for the final push on Earth. They are broadcasting a repeating demand for our unconditional surrender. Vance walked over to his command jacket, resting on the back of a chair. He slipped it on, snapping the heavy collar shut. Signal the Nemesis. Prepare my shuttle for immediate transfer. The junior analyst, still pale and sweating, stared at the map. Admiral, they have a planetary defense grid established over Mars. If we engage them head-on, the casualty projections. Vance stopped at the blast doors. He looked back at the young man. The time for projections is over. They came into our home. They slaughtered our people. Now we are going to teach them why the rest of the universe should fear the dark. Vance stepped onto the shuttle. The door sealed shut, locking out the noise of the base. Within minutes, the shuttle broke the atmosphere, leaving the blue skies of Earth behind, accelerating into the coal black. When Vance stepped onto the bridge of the Nemesis, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of ozone and machine oil. The bridge was a cavernous space bathed in low-red tactical lighting. Dozens of crew members, seasoned veterans of deep space patrols, manned their stations. There was no chatter. There was only the quiet, efficient hum of a crew executing their duty. Vance walked to the center of the command deck. The crew did not salute. They didn't have time. They simply locked their eyes on their screens, their hands moving in blurs over their consoles. Report, Vance commanded, standing before the massive forward viewport. Admiral on deck, Commander Hayes said, having arrived moments earlier. He stood by the tactical holotable. We are approaching the Martian perimeter. The Dominion blockade is completely stationary. Their shields are modulated for energy weapons. They think we're going to throw plasma at them. Vance stared out the viewport. Mars hung in the distance, a rust-red jewel surrounded by the glittering lights of the Dominion blockade. They looked formidable. They looked invincible. They don't know who we are yet, Vance said quietly. They think we are a species of politicians and poets. Let's disabuse them of that notion. Commander, spool the spinal railgun. Load kinetic penetrators. Solid tungsten. Let's see how their energy shields handle 100 tons of metal moving at a fraction of the speed of light. Spooling railgun, targeting the lead Dominion dreadnought. A deep mechanical whine resonated through the deck plating of the Nemesis. The massive magnetic coils running the length of the ship began to charge, drawing power directly from the ship's fusion heart. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we are receiving a transmission from the Dominion flagship. They are demanding we halt our approach and power down our engines, or they will fire." Vance's expression did not change. He did not blink. "Ignore them," Vance said. "Keep our comms dark. We have nothing to say to them." The distance closed. 10 million miles, 5 million miles, 1 million. The Dominion fleet finally realized that the black wedge approaching them was not slowing down. Alarms must have been screaming on their bridges. Their gilded ships began to break formation, their turrets desperately swiveling to track the incoming American fleet. "Target locked," Hayes said. His voice was completely devoid of emotion. Just a man doing a job. "Fire," Vance said. There was no grand speech. There was no hesitation. Just a single brutal command. The Nemesis shuddered violently. From the front of the ship, a streak of white-hot friction tore through the vacuum of space. The solid tungsten slug crossed the distance between the two fleets in a matter of seconds. It struck the Dominion dreadnought dead center. The alien energy shields flared brilliantly for a microsecond before shattering like cheap glass. The kinetic impact did not cause a fiery explosion. It was much worse. The sheer force of the tungsten slug transferred directly into the dreadnought's hull, buckling the superstructure instantly. The massive ship simply collapsed inward on itself, its spine snapping, its reactors critical. A silent, expanding ring of debris and frozen atmosphere blew outward into the void. In a single heartbeat, the pride of the Dominion fleet was reduced to an expanding cloud of scrap metal. On the bridge of the Nemesis, nobody cheered. Nobody celebrated. They immediately moved to their next targets. "Target destroyed," Hayes reported. "The enemy fleet is breaking formation. They are attempting to return fire." "Let them try," Vance said. "Engage at will. No quarter asked. None given. Wipe them out." The Obsidian fleet descended upon the panicked Dominion forces like a pack of wolves upon a scattered herd. Stealth frigates decloaked beneath the alien cruisers, firing point-blank volleys of armor-piercing torpedoes that gutted the enemy ships from the bottom up. Destroyers unleashed swarms of autonomous kinetic drones that tore through the Dominion fighter screens like buckshot through paper. The Dominion had built their empire on fear and technological superiority. But their technology was designed to fight other civilized, predictable empires. They had never fought a species that waged war with such terrifying mechanical efficiency. They had never fought the United States Space Command. Vance stood at the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the stars burn. Enemy plasma fire impacted the thick blade of armor of the Nemesis, scarring the hull, but failing to penetrate. "Admiral," the tactical officer said, "we have multiple Dominion cruisers attempting to break orbit and flee the system. They are trying to jump to hyperspace." "Do not let them spin up their drives," Vance ordered. "Take out their engines. Nobody leaves this system to warn the core worlds. Not yet." The Nemesis banked hard, its thrusters firing in a sequence that defied its massive size. The spinal railgun spooled up again, unleashing another tungsten slug that caught a fleeing cruiser right in its engine block, ripping the rear half of the ship to shreds. Within 15 minutes, the engagement was over. The blockade was broken. The orbit of Mars was now a graveyard of burning Dominion ships. The debris field was so thick it was registering on the Nemesis's navigational hazard sensors. "All enemy vessels neutralized or disabled," Hayes reported. He wiped a drop of sweat from his forehead. "We own the orbital space." "Casualties?" Vance asked. "Minimal structural damage to the Vanguard destroyers. No casualties reported across the fleet, Admiral." Vance nodded slowly. The first obstacle had been cleared. The ticking clock had been paused. But he knew this was only the beginning. The Dominion core worlds still existed. The men who gave the order to burn Ganymede were still sitting comfortably in their gilded palaces across the galaxy. "Hold position and establish a perimeter," Vance ordered. "Deploy search and rescue teams to the wreckage. Look for their command modules. I want prisoners. I want intelligence. I want to know exactly where their fleet command is hiding." As the crew went to work, Vance remained at the window. He looked past the floating wreckage of the alien ships out toward the deep black of the galaxy. They had wanted a war. They had burned 40,000 innocent people to prove a point. Silas Vance closed his eyes for a brief second, the image of his own family crossing his mind. He knew the cost of what was about to happen. He knew the blood that would be spilled on both sides before this was over. But there was a promise to keep, a promise forged in the fires of Earth's own brutal history. When you attack our homes, when you kill our people, we do not surrender. We do not forget. Admiral, Hayes interrupted, his voice tight. Search teams have secured a Dominion escape pod from the command dreadnought. They have a high-ranking survivor, an observer. Vance opened his eyes. The cold steel returned to his gaze. Bring him to the interrogation block, Vance said. Let's find out what kind of monsters we are dealing with. The real war had just begun, and the Obsidian fleet was about to bring the darkness directly to the Dominion's front door. The interrogation block of the USS Nemesis was built for function, not cruelty. It was a 12 by 12 box of solid titanium lit by a single unforgiving LED panel. There were no restraints. There were no tools of torture. The United States Space Command did not need them. Isolation and absolute suffocating silence were enough to break most men. Valentor, the Dominion observer, sat at the center of the room. His iron-gray skin was pale. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He had spent the last 8 hours staring at the matte black walls, replaying the destruction of the Martian blockade in his mind. He had watched the pride of the galactic Dominion swat away like insects by a species they had classified as harmless. The heavy blast door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Admiral Silas Vance stepped into the room. He did not look like a conqueror. He carried no weapons. In his right hand, he held 2 white ceramic mugs. Steam curled from the dark liquid inside. The scent of roasted coffee beans, a smell entirely alien to the Dominion, filled the sterile air. Vance walked to the metal table and set one mug down in front of Valen. He took the seat across from the alien, resting his forearms on the cold steel. He took a slow sip from his own mug. "Drink," Vance said. His voice was a low, resonant gravel. Valen stared at the black liquid. "Is it poison?" Vance offered a dry, humorless smile. "If I wanted you dead, observer, you would be floating in the Martian debris field with your fleet master. It's coffee. Drink it." Valen hesitated, then wrapped his long, multi-jointed fingers around the mug. He brought it to his lips and took a sip. His eyes widened slightly at the bitter, harsh taste, followed by the immediate rush of caffeine. It was a grounding sensation. Real. Earthly. "You are a monster," Valen whispered, setting the mug down. His voice shook. "You destroyed 40 ships, 50,000 Dominion sailors. You didn't even ask for our surrender. You lost the right to surrender when you turned Ganymede into a graveyard," Vance replied. His tone did not rise. It was completely flat, devoid of rage, which made it all the more terrifying. "You killed 40,000 American citizens. Men, women, children. You didn't give them a chance to surrender. You gave them a death sentence." "It was a tactical necessity," Valen countered, though the conviction had bled out of his voice. "To maintain order in the galaxy. You were becoming too independent. The Council." Vance leaned forward. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I don't care about your council," Vance said. "I don't care about your galactic order. I want to know where your fleet command is hiding. I want the coordinates to the core worlds." Valen let out a hollow, desperate laugh. "You think you can fight the Shateru Dominion? You won a single battle. When the Emperor learns of this, he will send 1,000 ships. He will burn your Earth until it is glass." Vance reached into his jacket. He pulled out a sleek black data drive and tossed it onto the table. It slid across the metal, stopping inches from Valen's hands. "We pulled your command logs from the wreckage," Vance said. "We spent the last 4 hours decrypting them. You thought our code breakers were primitive. You were wrong about that too. We didn't just find your patrol routes. We found the manifest for the prisoner transports that left Ganymede before the bombardment." Valen's breath hitched. The physiological response was subtle, a slight flaring of his nostrils, a tightening of the jaw, but Vance caught it. "You didn't kill everyone," Vance stated. It was not a question. Valen looked away. The primary objective was eradication, but the genetic division, they made requests, they wanted subjects. Humans are incredibly adaptable. Your physiology, Your endurance? They wanted to know how much you could take. The silence that followed was heavier than the gravity of a collapsed star. Vance did not shout. He did not slam his fist on the table. But the look in his eyes was the look of a man looking down the barrel of a rifle, waiting for the recoil. How many? Vance asked softly. 12, Valen whispered. 12 children, between the ages of 8 and 15. They were loaded onto a stealth transport hours before the bombardment. Where? Valen shook his head. I don't know the exact coordinates. It's a black site. Project Ashglass. The military doesn't run it. The science directorate does. It's a place where things go to be forgotten. Vance stood up. He buttoned his uniform jacket. Then you had better start remembering Observer. Because if I have to dismantle this galaxy star by star, to find them I will. Vance left the interrogation room, the door sealing shut behind him. He walked down the long steel corridors of the Nemesis. His boots echoed against the grating. He passed platoons of United States Space Marines in heavy combat armor. They stood at attention as he passed, their faces hidden behind dark visors. They were the finest warriors Earth had ever produced, honed in secret, trained for a war they hoped would never come. Vance entered the Combat Information Center. Commander Hayes was waiting by the central holotable. The map of the galaxy rotated slowly, a sea of hostile red dots representing the Dominion's vast territory. Admiral, Hayes said, straightening his posture. Did he break? He didn't have to, Vance said, walking to the table. The logs confirmed it. 12 children, taken from Ganymede. They are alive. A ripple of shock went through the bridge crew. Fingers paused over keyboards. Eyes darted toward the Admiral. In the cold calculus of interstellar war, millions died in an instant. But the thought of 12 American children sitting in the dark in an alien laboratory changed the entire equation. It was no longer a mission of vengeance. It was a rescue. Where are they? Hayes asked, his jaw tight. A black site. Project Ashglass, Vance said. He tapped the holotable. Run a cross-reference on all encrypted Dominion logistics routes. Look for supply chains that don't match military outposts. Look for high-density power draws in dead-end systems. Look for the shadows. The ship's artificial intelligence, a massively parallel quantum processor named Minuteman, began to chew through the data. Lines of code cascaded across the screens. 5 minutes passed in absolute silence. Then a single isolated star system pulsed green on the map. Match found, Admiral, the tactical officer reported. Arkan's Wake. It's a dead system. A collapsed neutron star surrounded by a dense radiation field. Scanners show no habitable planets, but there is a massive localized energy signature buried deep within the crust of a rogue moon orbiting the dead star. Bring up the intercepted data from the Lyros relay, Vance ordered. A stream of decrypted text flooded the secondary screen. It was a medical report. Unforgiving, clinical, brutal, subject 04, EH10. Biomechanical integration phase 2 complete. Cortical rejection mitigated. Pain receptors bypassed. Weaponization potential high. Vance read the words. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach. They weren't just experimenting on the children. They were turning them into monsters. They were erasing their humanity, replacing bone and tissue with alien circuitry. There's a timestamp on the integration schedule, Admiral, Hayes said, pointing to the bottom of the document. Phase 3, final neural overwrite. It's scheduled to begin in exactly 12 hours. Once Phase 3 initiates, the cortical tissue is permanently fused. The subject's original personalities, their memories, everything that makes them human will be erased. They will become biological drones. 12 hours. The clock was no longer ticking for Earth. It was ticking for 12 terrified kids sitting in a cage millions of light years from home. Vance hit the ship-wide intercom button on the console. Attention all hands, this is the Admiral. Across the massive dreadnought, every Marine, every engineer, every pilot stopped what they were doing. They looked to the nearest speaker. We did not ask for this war. Vance's voice rang out steady and commanding. We built this fleet to ensure that if the monsters ever came to our door, we would be ready to meet them. They came. They struck Ganymede. But they didn't just take lives. They took prisoners. 12 children are currently being held at a Dominion black site in the Arkan's Wake system. In exactly 12 hours, the Dominion will subject them to a procedure that will strip away their humanity. Vance paused. He let the weight of the words settle over his crew. The United States military has a core tenet. We do not leave our people behind, not on the battlefield, not in the dark, not ever. We are going to Arkan's wake. We are going to rip that facility out of the rock, and we are going to bring our children home. Secure all stations for immediate hyperspace jump. Godspeed to us all. He cut the comms. Helm, Vance said. Plot a course for Arkan's wake. The helmsman looked up, his face pale. Admiral, Arkan's wake is deep in the core worlds. To get there, we have to navigate through the Ethelgard sector. That is the Dominion capital. Their entire home fleet is massed there. 200 warships, orbital defense platforms. It's an impenetrable fortress. There is no such thing as impenetrable, Vance said. We don't have time to go around. We go straight through. Sir, jumping directly into the capital system. Hayes started, his voice a warning. It's suicide. Even the Nemesis can't withstand the combined firepower of 200 dreadnoughts. We aren't going to fight them, Commander. Vance said, his eyes locked on the holographic projection of the Dominion capital. We are going to terrify them. Spool the drives. Deep within the bowels of the Nemesis, the dark matter reactors howled. The fabric of space-time began to warp around the black hull of the dreadnought. The stars outside the viewport stretched into long, brilliant lines of white light. Jump in 3, 2, 1, mark. The universe tore open. Ethelgard was a world of unimaginable wealth. It was a planet encased entirely in gold and white cityscapes orbiting a brilliant blue sun. For 10,000 years, it had been the untouchable jewel of the galaxy. No enemy fleet had ever breached its airspace. The citizens of Ethelgard believed they were gods. Until the sky turned black, the Obsidian fleet did not drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They did not announce their arrival. Through a series of incredibly dangerous pinpoint microjumps calculated by the Minuteman AI, the American fleet materialized directly in low planetary orbit. 300 matte black warships eclipsed the sun. On the ground, millions of Dominion citizens looked up in absolute horror. The golden spires of their cities were cast in dark, ominous shadows. The air raid sirens, which hadn't been used in a millennium, began to scream. In the Dominion High Command, chaos erupted. The Emperor watched from his glass palace as the massive brutalist wedge of the USS Nemesis hovered directly over his capital, its spinal railgun aimed dead center at his throne room. The Dominion home fleet, stationed on the far side of the planet, scrambled frantically to break orbit and engage. But they were too late. They were out of position. Earth had a knife against the throat of their king. Admiral, the tactical officer reported, his hands flying across the console. The Dominion home fleet is moving to intercept. Estimated time to weapons range is 4 minutes. Planetary defense cannons are tracking us. Let them track, Vance said, his voice ice cold. Communications. Open a broadband unencrypted channel, audio only. Broadcast to every screen, every comm link, every military frequency on that planet. Channel open, sir. Vance stepped out up to the microphone. He did not yell. He spoke with the quiet, devastating authority of a man holding a loaded gun. This is Admiral Silas Vance of the United States Space Command. You burned our homes. You murdered our people. You thought we were weak. Look up. Look at your sky. I hold the power to turn your golden world into a graveyard. I hold the power to end your empire today. On the surface of Ethelgard, total panic ensued. Millions fled to subterranean bunkers. The Emperor stood frozen in his palace, staring at the black Leviathan in the sky. But I am not here for you, Vance's voice echoed across the planet. Not yet. I am here for what you stole. Do not follow us. If a single Dominion ship enters the hyperspace lane behind my fleet, I will return, and I will leave nothing but ash. Vance cut the channel. Electronic Warfare Division, Vance ordered. Deploy the blackout. From the hull of the Nemesis, massive electromagnetic pulse generators fired. It was not a destructive EMP. It was a targeted, localized data virus, a ghost in the machine designed by the brightest minds at the Pentagon. It washed over the Dominion home fleet like a silent wave. Instantly, every targeting sensor, every navigational computer, every weapons lock on the Dominion ships went blind. Their engines sputtered, their screens filled with cascading errors. They were paralyzed, not destroyed but entirely helpless. 4 minutes until their systems reboot, Admiral. Hayes reported, a tight smile forming on his face. That's all we need, Vance said. Helm, execute the secondary jump. Destination Arkan's Wake. Let's go get our kids. The Obsidian fleet vanished. 1 second they were blanketing the sky of Ethelgard, and the next they were gone, leaving behind a terrified, paralyzed empire that finally understood exactly who they had gone to war with. The transition through hyperspace was violent. The Minuteman AI was pushing the engines past their theoretical limits. The bulkheads of the Nemesis groaned under the immense gravitational stress. Vance stood at the hollow table. The clock in the corner of his HUD read 08:14:00. 8 hours and 14 minutes left. Admiral Moa, the chief medical officer, a stern woman named Dr. Eris, approached the table. She held a datapad tight to her chest. I've been analyzing the rest of the medical files from Project Ashglass. You need to understand what we are walking into. Vance turned to her. Give it to me straight, Doctor. They aren't just torturing these kids, Eris said, her voice dropping. They are weaponizing their trauma. The Dominion technology integrates with the host nervous system, but it uses extreme emotional distress as a power source. The more fear, the more pain the subject feels, the more destructive energy the cybernetics can output. It's a closed-loop system of pure suffering. Vance felt a cold fury settle into his bones. It was a familiar feeling. The same feeling he had in the deserts of the Middle East decades ago, the same feeling he had every time he saw the strong prey upon the weak. If Phase 3 completes, Eris continued, the cybernetics will sever the brain's frontal lobe. They will lose all capacity for empathy, memory, and reason. They will become living weapons. If we don't get them out before that clock hits 0, the children they were will be dead, even if their bodies are still breathing. We will get them, Vance said. And if we find them, changed, Hayes asked quietly from the other side of the table, if the Dominion forces them to fight us. Vance looked at his second in command. The warrior's code was simple. Protect the innocent, destroy the enemy. But what happens when the innocent become the enemy? They are American citizens, Vance said, his voice brooking no argument. They are children. We do not fire on them, under any circumstances. Is that understood? Understood, sir, Hayes replied. Dropping out of hyperspace in 3 minutes, the helmsman announced. Battle stations, Vance ordered. Load, drop pods. I want Marine Force recon in the tubes. We are going to hit this facility hard, fast, and without mercy. The Nemesis tore back into real space. Arkan's Wake was a nightmare of a star system. The collapsed neutron star at the center cast a sickly violet light across the void. The gravitational shears were immense pulling streams of plasma from the dark rocks that orbited it. The rogue moon holding Project Ashglass was a jagged, scarred sphere of black iron. It had no atmosphere, it had no oceans. It was just a floating tomb. Scanners are having a hard time penetrating the crust, Admiral, the tactical officer said, squinting at his readouts. The neutron star's radiation is scrambling our telemetry, but I have a fix on the primary energy signature. It's 3 miles deep, protected by heavy kinetic shielding and 50 meters of solid bedrock. They knew they couldn't hide it, so they buried it, Hayes noted. We don't have time to dig, Vance said. We crack it open, spool the railgun, maximum yield. Sir, firing the spinal railgun into a moon, the seismic shock wave could destabilize the entire crust. We could crush the facility. Not if we calculate the resonance frequency perfectly, Vance said. He looked at the engineering station. Give me a localized tectonic fracture. I don't want it to destroy the bunker. I want to blow the roof off. The Nemesis aligned its massive frame. The targeting lasers painted a single glowing red dot on the surface of the black moon. Firing, the weapons officer stated. The dreadnought kicked back. The tungsten slug struck the moon's surface. There was no sound in the vacuum of space, but the visual was apocalyptic. The crust of the moon shattered. A massive plume of pulverized iron and rock erupted into orbit. Deep fault lines spider-webbed across the surface, glowing red with the heat of the impact. Target area breached, Hayes reported. The kinetic shielding is down. The roof of the facility is exposed to the vacuum. Send the Marines, Vance ordered. From the belly of the Nemesis, dozens of black drop pods shot downward like a swarm of angry hornets. They plummeted through the debris field, their retro rockets firing at the last possible second, slamming into the exposed metal grating of the Dominion black site. The war had come to Arkin's wake. The clock on Vance's HUD read 042200. Vance did not stay on the bridge. He turned and walked toward the armory. "Admiral," Hayes called out, surprised. "Where are you going?" "I gave them my word," Vance said, not stopping. "I promised we would bring them home. I'm not doing that from a chair." 10 minutes later, Vance stood in the airlock of a heavy assault shuttle. He wore the standard-issue black reactive armor of the Space Marines. He carried a high-powered kinetic rifle. At 55, he was older than every man in the platoon standing behind him. But as he racked the bolt of his rifle, his eyes were as cold and sharp as a newly forged blade. "Listen up," Vance said over the squad comms. The 20 Marines of Force Recon locked their eyes on their commander. "So we are walking into a meat grinder. The Dominion knows we are here. They will try to purge the data, and they will try to purge the subjects. Our primary, secondary, and tertiary objective is the extraction of those 12 children. You check your targets. You fire with precision. You do not let a single Dominion scientist or soldier draw a breath. We are the reckoning. Am I clear?" "Crystal, sir," the Marines barked in unison. The shuttle slammed onto the deck of the breached facility. The boarding ramp dropped. The interior of Project Ashglass was a descent into hell. The walls were lined with strange glowing circuitry that looked almost organic. The air, what was left of it in the pressurized zones, smelled like burnt copper and antiseptic. The Dominion guards did not surrender. They fought with the desperation of men who knew they were already dead. Plasma bolts seared through the corridors, melting the metal bulkheads. But they were fighting United States Marines. Vance moved with brutal, terrifying efficiency. He didn't waste movement. He didn't shout. He moved from cover to cover, his rifle barking, short, controlled bursts. A Dominion soldier stepped out from a side corridor, leveling a heavy plasma caster. Vance fired twice. 2 center mass hits. The alien dropped instantly. "Moving up," Vance ordered. They pushed deeper, level by level. The resistance grew heavier. They encountered automated defense turrets, and they encountered heavily armored shock troops. The Marines took hits. A young private to Vance's left caught a plasma round to the shoulder, his armor hissing as it sealed the wound. He didn't fall. He just gritted his teeth, switched his rifle to his left hand, and kept firing. 2:15:00. They breached the primary medical wing. The heavy vault doors blew inward in a shower of sparks and smoke. Vance stepped through the smoke, his rifle raised. The room was massive, lined with glass containment cells. Dominion scientists in white coats scrambled frantically, attempting to erase data drives and initiate the purge protocols. "Hold fire," Vance yelled. "Watch the cells." The Marines fanned out their laser sights, sweeping the room. The scientists froze, raising their hands in terror. Vance walked slowly down the center aisle. He looked into the first glass cell. It was empty. He looked into the second. Empty. A cold dread began to claw at his chest. He moved faster. Third, fourth, fifth. It's all empty. There was blood on the floors of the cells. There were discarded restraints, but no children. He reached the end of the hall. There were 2 cells left. Vance approached the glass. His breath hitched. Inside the cell sat a boy. He was perhaps 15 years old. His head was shaved. Running down the length of his spine was a jagged strip of pulsing blue alien metal grafted directly into his flesh. His eyes were open, but they were entirely black, devoid of irises or whites. In the cell next to him stood a little girl, 10 years old. She wore a soiled hospital gown. Her eyes glowed with a faint, unnatural blue light. They were KL and Alara, the last 2. "Where are the others?" Vance demanded, turning to the nearest Dominion scientist, a trembling alien clutching a datapad. The scientist fell to his knees. Non-viable. The integration. The pain was too much. Their hearts gave out. These 2, They are the only ones left. Phase 3 is initiating. You are too late. Vance looked up. Above the cells, a digital countdown ticked down. 00:10:00. 10 minutes until their minds were gone forever. Get these doors open, Vance barked to his combat engineers. Hack the console. Blow the glass if you have to. Sir, the glass is hyper-dense diamondoid, an engineer shouted furiously, typing at the access panel. It's wired to the primary reactor. If we blow it, we fry the kids. I need to bypass the security matrix. Do it fast, Vance ordered. Suddenly, the heavy blast doors at the far end of the medical wing slammed shut, locking them in. The lights shifted from stark white to a deep emergency crimson. A voice echoed over the intercom. It was the Dominion base commander. You humans are incredibly persistent, but you are foolish. You brought your commander into a scene. From the walls, hidden panels slid open. Heavy automated Gatling plasma turrets descended into the room, locking onto the Marine squad. There was no cover. They were trapped in a fatal crossfire. Admiral Hayes' voice crackled over the comms from the Nemesis. We are tracking massive power spikes in your sector. They are arming internal defenses. We can't get a lock to beam you out through the interference. Vance looked at the turrets. He looked at his men. Then he looked at the two children trapped behind the glass. Cale, the older boy, had stood up. His black eyes tracked the turrets. He raised his hand. The blue metal grafted to his spine surged with blinding light. Get down, Vance roared. The room didn't explode. It folded. A wave of localized catastrophic gravity erupted from the boy's hand. The massive plasma turrets were instantly crushed into compact cubes of scrap metal, torn from their mountings and slammed into the floor. The Dominion scientists were thrown violently against the walls. The glass of the containment cells shattered outward. Cale stepped out over the broken glass. Alara followed, moving with an eerie, silent grace. The Marines raised their rifles, their training kicking in. These were no longer children. They were biological weapons of mass destruction. Hold your fire, Vance screamed, stepping between his men and the two children. I said, hold your fire! Cale turned his terrifying black eyes toward Vance. The boy's face was devoid of emotion. He raised his hand again, pointing it directly at the Admiral's chest. The air between them shimmered with lethal kinetic energy. You wear a uniform, Cale said. His voice was layered, echoing with the synthetic hum of his cybernetics. You are soldiers. Soldiers watch. Soldiers let them hurt us. The room was dead silent. The Marines had their fingers on the triggers, waiting for the order. One twitch from the boy, and Vance would be crushed into a singularity. Vance did not raise his rifle. He did not step back. He reached down, his hands deliberate and slow. He unslung his kinetic rifle and dropped it to the floor. He unclasped his sidearm and kicked it away. He stood entirely unarmed, chest exposed, facing the living weapon the Dominion had created. I am a soldier, Tom, Vance said, his voice quiet, calm, and unwavering. And I failed you. We all did. We were too late for the others. But I am here now. Cale's hand trembled slightly. The blue light flared. They told us Earth forgot about us. They told us we were nothing. They lied, Vandy said. He took a slow step forward, entering the lethal radius of the boy's power. Look at me, Cale. Look at my eyes. I brought the entire United States Navy across the galaxy to find you. We burned their fleets. We broke their capital. We tore this moon apart. Just for you. Alara, the little girl with the glowing blue eyes, stepped out from behind Cale. She looked at Vance. She didn't look at his uniform or his weapons. She seemed to look right through his chest into his soul. He's telling the truth, Alara whispered. Her voice sounded like breaking glass. He's sad. He's so sad for us. Vance took another step. He was an arm's length away now. You have every right to be angry, son. You have every right to hate the universe. But you don't have to be the monster they tried to make you. You are an American, and you are coming home. Vance reached out his hand, not holding a weapon, not issuing an order, just an open hand offered in the dark. For 10 excruciating seconds, the fate of the mission and perhaps the galaxy hung in the balance. The cybernetic programming fought against the bruised, battered soul of a 15-year-old boy. Slowly, the blinding light fading from his spine, Cale lowered his hand. He looked at Vance's open palm. Then Kale collapsed. Vance caught him before he hit the ground, wrapping his arms around the boy's scarred mechanical back. Alara stepped forward and buried her face in Vance's combat vest, her small hands gripping the heavy armor. "We've got you," Vance whispered, his voice finally cracking the immense weight of the command, the death and the Roro crashing over him all at once. "We've got you. Nobody is ever going to hurt you again." Vance looked up at his Marines. The hardened veterans of Force Recon had lowered their weapons. Behind their dark visors, more than a few jaws were tight, fighting back the heavy emotion of the moment. "Medic," Vance ordered, his voice returning to its steady, authoritative rumble. "Get them stable. Combat engineers, blow that wall. We are leaving." The mission wasn't over. The Dominion still existed. But as Vance carried the unconscious boy through the smoking ruins of Arkan's wake, flanked by his Marines, he knew they had already won the only battle that truly mattered. They had saved their humanity. The Obsidian fleet would soon finish what it started, not with genocide, but with the cold, hard light of the truth. The extraction from Arkan's wake was not a victory lap. It was a bleeding, brutal fighting retreat. The crust of the rogue moon was actively destabilizing from the USS Nemesis's railgun strike. Massive tectonic plates of black iron ground against one another, venting subterranean gases that ignited in the vacuum of space. The underground facility of Project Ashglass was tearing itself apart. Admiral Silas Vance carried the unconscious body of 15-year-old Kale over his shoulder. The boy's cybernetic spine pulsed with a dim, fading blue light against the heavy black reactive armor of Vance's shoulder guard. Alara, the 10-year-old girl, ran close behind, her small hand gripping the thick tactical webbing of Vance's combat vest. All around them, the 20 men of Force Recon laid down a withering wall of suppressive fire. The Dominion base garrison, desperate to prevent the Americans from escaping with the Empire's darkest secrets, threw everything they had into the collapsing corridors. Heavy plasma casters melted the bulkheads. The air was a toxic soup of vaporized metal ozone and burning synthetics. "Keep moving!" Vance roared over the deafening roar of the collapsing facility. "Do not stop! Push through the breach!" A plasma bolt the size of a man's head slammed into the chest plate of a Marine to Vance's right. The kinetic force threw the soldier backward into a wall. His armor smoked, the ablative layers completely burned away. Two of his squad mates didn't hesitate. They grabbed him by the drag handles on his vest and hauled him to his feet, firing their kinetic rifles one-handed as they pulled him toward the extraction point. They reached the breached ceiling. The night sky of Arkan's wake, illuminated by the sickly violet light of the neutron star, was visible through the jagged hole in the rock. 4 heavy assault shuttles hovered just above the breach. Their side doors opened, their twin-linked rotary cannons tearing into the Dominion reinforcements, pouring into the lower levels. "Get them on board," Vance shouted, passing Kyle into the waiting arms of a Navy medic. He turned and hoisted Alara up. "Awesome, The little girl didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked at Vance with those glowing, unnatural eyes, a silent witness to the absolute violence men would commit to bring her home. Vance turned back to the breach. He raised his rifle, standing shoulder to shoulder with his rearguard. "Last man out," Vance ordered. "Collapse the tunnel." The combat engineers threw their remaining satchel charges down the corridor. The Marines fell back, piling into the shuttles as the thrusters screamed against the moon's gravity. Vance was the last man to step off the grating. The charges detonated. The tunnel collapsed in a massive cloud of dust and fire, sealing the Dominion forces inside the dying facility. The shuttles banked hard, accelerating toward the safety of the Obsidian fleet holding in high orbit. Vance sat heavily on the metal bench of the shuttle. He unclasped his helmet and let it fall to the deck. His face was covered in a layer of gray dust and dried sweat. He looked across the bay. Kale was strapped into a medical gurney and oxygen mask over his pale face. Alara sat beside him, wrapped in a heavy thermal blanket. Vance looked at his men. The 20 Marines who had gone down with him were covered in scorch marks. 3 were critically wounded, bleeding through their armor. But they were alive. Then Commander Hayes' voice cracked over the secure comms in Vance's earpiece. "Admiral, we have incoming." The Dominion home fleet didn't stay paralyzed. "They've tracked our hyperspace wake. We have slipspace ruptures forming all around our perimeter. Hundreds of them." Vance closed his eyes. He took one deep, ragged breath. Then he opened them. The weariness was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating mind of a fleet commander. "I'm on my way up," Vance said. The shuttle slammed into the hangar bay of the USS Nemesis. The deck was a chaotic swarm of activity. Medical teams rushed the wounded Marines and the two children toward the trauma center. Damage control teams scrambled to refuel and rearm the dropships. Vance didn't stop. He walked straight from the hangar deck to the medical bay. He needed to know the cost of what they had just pulled out of the dark. Dr. Eris was waiting for him outside the heavy glass doors of the intensive care unit. She looked exhausted. "Report," Vance commanded. "They are stable, Admiral," Eris said softly, looking through the glass at the two children. "But the damage, it's catastrophic. Kael's spinal column is completely fused with the Dominion technology. We can't remove it without severing his central nervous system. He will carry that hardware for the rest of his life." "And the girl?" Vance asked, his voice tight. Alara's alterations were strictly neurological. They hardwired a quantum processing array into her cerebral cortex. She processes information, emotion, and sensory input at a rate that would shatter a normal human mind. She isn't a weapon like the boy. She's a living archive. She remembers everything, every moment of pain, every face of the people who hurt them. Vance looked through the glass. Kael was awake now. The boy was sitting on the edge of the biobed looking at his own hands. The blue light along his spine was dim quiet. He looked up, his black irisless eyes meeting Vance's through the glass. Vance placed his hand on the glass. He didn't offer a hollow smile. He didn't offer false hope. He just offered a silent promise. "You are safe. The war stops at this door." Kael slowly raised his hand and pressed it against the glass, mirroring Vance. For the first time since they had found him in that dark cage, the boy's shoulders dropped. The tension, the coiled violence bled out of him. He was just a kid again. A broken kid, but a kid nonetheless. Vance turned away from the glass. He had a fleet to save. When Vance stepped onto the bridge of the Nemesis, the tactical map was a sea of red. "Status," Vance barked, striding toward the holotable. "They have us boxed in, sir," Hayes reported. His voice was steady, but the grim reality was evident on his face. 500 Dominion warships have formed a spherical blockade around the Arkan's wake system. They've deployed gravity well generators. We cannot jump to hyperspace. We are locked in real space. Vance looked at the map. The American fleet consisted of 300 ships. They were heavily armored, possessing vastly superior kinetic weaponry, but they were outnumbered almost 2-to-1. More importantly, they were bruised. The ships had been running their reactors redline for 12 hours. The crews were exhausted. "They aren't moving in to engage," the tactical officer observed. "They are holding position at maximum plasma range." "They don't want to fight us," Valentor said. The Dominion observer was standing in the corner of the bridge. Vance had allowed him to remain. Valen had watched the entire rescue mission unfold from the screens. He had seen the United States Marines throw themselves into the fire, not to conquer a world, but to pull two children from a basement. "The Emperor is terrified of you," Valen continued, stepping into the red light of the holotable. "He knows your ships can crack his dreadnoughts. He knows your soldiers do not break. He is going to wait until your life support fails or until your reactors run dry. He is going to starve you out, and then he will claim victory to the galaxy." "Admiral Thiam," the communications officer interrupted, "we are receiving a wide-beam transmission from the Dominion flagship. It's the Emperor himself. He demands your surrender." "Put him on screen," Vance ordered. The massive forward viewport faded, replaced by the towering image of the Dominion Emperor. He sat upon a throne of white stone draped in ceremonial armor. His face was a mask of absolute arrogant authority. "Admiral Vance," the Emperor's voice boomed across the bridge, "you have fought a valiant primitive war. You have destroyed my outer fleets. You have broken my capital's defenses. But your crusade ends here in the dark. Give me the subjects you stole from Arkan's wake. Power down your vessels. I will allow your crew to live as thralls in the Outer Rim. Refuse, and you will die in the cold." Vance stood at the center of the bridge. He looked at the alien Emperor. He felt the eyes of every man and woman on the Nemesis locked onto him. He thought of the 40,000 dead on Ganymede. He thought of the 10 children who didn't survive the operating tables of ash glass. Vance did not yell. He did not posture. Emperor, Vance said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. You made a fundamental miscalculation when you started this war. You thought power was measured in the number of ships you possess. You thought fear was the only currency the universe respected. Vance stepped closer to the camera pickup. We didn't come here to steal your subjects. We came here to rescue our children, and we didn't come here to conquer your empire. We came here to end it. Vance looked at Hayes. Execute the Archangel Protocol. Hayes didn't hesitate. He slammed his palm onto a red interface panel on the holotable. What are you doing? The Emperor demanded, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his arrogant face. Your weapons cannot reach me. We aren't firing our weapons, Vance said. We are firing the truth. Deep within the Nemesis, the Minuteman AI unleashed the payload it had been compiling since they hacked the Dominion network. It was not a virus. It was a data packet. Massive, unredacted, unstoppable. Using the Nemesis's hyper-advanced communication arrays amplified by the sheer power of the ship's dark matter reactors, the American fleet blasted the data packet across the entire galaxy. They bypassed the Dominion's military encryption. They hijacked every civilian relay, and every commercial satellite, every public screen on every planet in the Empire. What is this? Valentor whispered, staring at the secondary screens on the bridge. It's everything, Vance said. On 10,000 worlds, the screens went black. Then the footage began to play. It started with Ganymede. The galaxy watched the unedited security feeds from the American colony. They saw the miners, the engineers, the mothers and fathers looking up at the sky in terror as the Dominion plasma rained down. They heard the screams. They heard the begging. They saw the unprovoked, merciless slaughter of unarmed civilians. Then the footage shifted. It showed the interior of Project Ashglass. It showed the medical logs, the autopsy reports, the sterile, horrific reality of what the Dominion Genetic Division was doing to human children. It showed Kyle screaming as alien metal was fused to his spine. It showed Alara staring blankly as her mind was torn apart. But it didn't stop there. Minuteman had dug deep. The AI broadcast centuries of the Dominion's darkest secrets, the treaties they had broken, the neutral worlds they had secretly poisoned to maintain economic control, the political dissidents they had executed and erased from history, the exact financial records of how the Emperor and his High Council lived in absolute luxury while the Outer Rim starved to feed their war machine. Vance stood on the bridge watching the Emperor's face turn an ashen gray on the main screen. You built an empire on the belief that you were civilized, Vance told the Emperor. You convinced billions of beings that you were the protectors of the galaxy, that your cruelty was necessary for peace. But you are just butchers in clean uniforms. Shut it down, the Emperor screamed, turning to someone off camera. Cut the relays, destroy their ships, fire. But the order fell on deaf ears. On the bridge of the Nemesis, the tactical map began to change. The 500 red dots surrounding the American fleet began to flicker. Admiral, the tactical officer said, his voice filled with awe. Dominion ships they are powering down their targeting scanners. Their weapons are going cold. Vance watched the map. The Dominion military was not made entirely of monsters. It was made of millions of soldiers, sailors, and commanders who believed they were serving a righteous cause. They had believed the propaganda. They had believed that Earth was a chaotic, violent threat that needed to be contained. But as they sat on their bridges, watching the footage of 10-year-old children being vivisected by their own government, the illusion shattered. We are receiving broadband transmissions from the Dominion fleet, the communications officer said. Sir, it's mutiny. The captains of the Vanguard cruisers are refusing orders to fire. They are locking out their political officers. On the main screen, the Emperor's throne room erupted into chaos. His own royal guard, the men sworn to protect him, lowered their weapons and turned toward the throne. The broadcast cut to black. Valentor fell to his knees on the deck of the Nemesis. He wept, not out of fear, but out of the profound, crushing weight of the guilt he had carried for his entire life. He had been a part of the machine. He had justified the cruelty. Vance looked down at the alien. He felt no triumph. He felt no joy. There is no joy in war, only the grim satisfaction of a necessary job completed. Commander Hayes, Vance said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the bridge. Sir, recall all fighters, secure from general quarters. Helm set a course for Earth, take us right through the center of their formation. The USS Nemesis, battered, scarred, and victorious, engaged its sublight thrusters. The massive black dreadnought moved slowly toward the Dominion blockade. As it approached, the alien warships did something they had never done in the 10,000-year history of their empire. They broke formation. They parted like the Red Sea, pulling their ships aside to create a massive empty corridor through the stars. They did not fire a single shot. They did not issue a single threat. They simply watched in absolute silence as the American fleet sailed right through the heart of their broken armada. Earth had not conquered the galaxy with fire. They had conquered it with a mirror. They had forced the monsters to look at their own reflection, and the monsters had destroyed themselves. The journey home was quiet. The adrenaline of combat faded, leaving only the heavy, suffocating weight of the aftermath. The adrenaline is a liar. It makes a man feel invincible. It makes the war feel glorious. But when the guns stop firing, the truth settles in the bones. Admiral Silas Vance walked alone down the lowest deck of the Nemesis. He wore his formal dress uniform. The silver olive branch was pinned back onto his chest. He stopped in front of the massive blast doors of Cargo Bay 4. He keyed the entry code. The doors slid open. The cargo bay was the size of a football field. It was freezing cold. The air scrubbers hummed a low, mournful tune. Lined up in perfect, immaculate rows were the metal caskets. There were 1,200 of them. 1,200 American sailors, pilots, and Marines who had answered the call. Who had flown into the dark, knowing the odds, knowing the parent, because someone had to hold the line. Each casket was draped perfectly in the flag of the United States. The red, white, and blue stood out starkly against the gray steel of the deck. Vance walked down the center aisle. His boots clicked in a slow, rhythmic cadence. He didn't read the names on the manifest. He knew them. He knew the young private who had taken a plasma bolt in the chest at Arkin's wake. He knew the pilots whose fighters had been shredded over Mars. He knew the engineers who had burned to death, keeping the reactors online. He was their commander. Their blood was on his hands. It was the burden of the stars he wore on his collar, a burden he would carry to his grave. Vance stopped at a casket near the front. He reached out and rested his calloused hand on the folded stars of the flag. He closed his eyes. The silence of the room was absolute. It was the quiet of men who had done their duty, who had paid the final price, and who were finally at rest. Admiral. Vance opened his eyes. He didn't turn around. He recognized the heavy footsteps. Commander Hayes walked up beside him. He too was in his dress blues. He looked at the endless rows of flags. "The fleet is holding in lunar orbit, sir," Hayes said softly. "The President has ordered a global day of mourning. The medical transports are preparing to take the wounded and the children down to the surface." Vance kept his hand on the casket. "Are they going to be all right, Commander?" Hayes knew he wasn't asking about the wounded Marines. "Doctor, Aris says Kyle is talking." "Just a little. He asked to see the ocean." "Ilara, she's quiet, but she held a nurse's hand today. They are broken, sir, but they are alive. They have time to heal." "Good," Vance whispered. Hayes reached into his pocket. He pulled out a battered silver thermos. He unscrewed the cap and poured the steaming black liquid into the metal cup. He offered it to Vance. Vance took it. The heat of the coffee warmed his cold fingers. He took a sip. It was bitter strong and tasted like home. "They asked for you, sir," Hayes said. "The kids, before they go down to Earth, they wanted to say goodbye." Vance nodded. He took one last look at the sea of flags. "We brought them home, Commander. All of them." "Yes, sir, we did." Vance turned and walked out of the cold dark, leaving his boys to rest. 3 years later, the galaxy was a different place. The Dominion was gone, fractured into 1,000 independent republics and alliances. There was no more emperor. There was no more absolute rule. It was chaotic, it was messy, and it was free. Earth did not take the throne. The United States Space Command returned to their borders. They rebuilt Ganymede. They traded with their neighbors. They became a quiet, stoic presence in the galactic community. They did not boast. They did not threaten. They didn't need to. Everyone knew what slept in the dark, waiting if the innocent were ever threatened again. On the newly rebuilt surface of Ganymede, beneath a massive reinforced biodome, a new plaza had been constructed. There were trees brought from Earth, their green leaves contrasting with the harsh ice of the moon outside the glass. In the center of the plaza stood a wall of solid black granite. It was simple, no statues of heroic soldiers, no triumphant eagles, just the names of the 40,000 civilians who had perished in the initial attack carved into the stone. Silas Vance, now retired, wearing a heavy civilian coat against the chill of the dome, stood before the wall. His hair was entirely white now. The lines on his face were carved deeper. He held 2 cups of coffee. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path behind him. Vance turned. KL stood there. He was 18 now. He was tall, broad-shouldered. He wore a simple civilian jacket that covered the blue cybernetics on his spine. The black eyes remained a permanent scar of his past, but the tension in his jaw was gone. He looked like a young man, not a weapon. Beside him was Alara, 13 years old. She wore a bright yellow scarf. Her eyes still held that faint, unnatural blue glow, but she was smiling, a small, genuine smile. Vance handed Cale the second cup of coffee. The young man took it, taking a sip and grimacing slightly at the bitterness, but he didn't hand it back. "You came," Vance said, his voice a warm rumble. "We wouldn't miss it, Admiral," Cale said. They stood together, an old soldier and the 2 children he had burned the galaxy to save, looking at the names on the wall. "They built a memorial for the fleet on Earth," Alara said quietly, her voice no longer sounding like breaking glass. "For the Marines, but I like this one better. It's quiet." "Quiet is good," Vance agreed. He looked up past the granite wall through the massive glass dome out into the endless, star-filled black of the universe. It was a dark, dangerous place. There would always be tyrants. There would always be monsters trying to build empires on the backs of the weak. But things had changed. The universe knew now that there was a line drawn in the stars, a line drawn in black armor and solid tungsten, a line defended by men and women who did not flinch, who did not run, and who never broke a promise. Vance put his hand on KL's shoulder. The young man leaned into the touch. "When the dark comes," Vance said softly, speaking to the children, to the dead, and to the stars themselves, "you do not have to be afraid. When you call for help, humanity will come. Always."